What made you want to get into podcasting? What are you trying to accomplish with it?
Right. I appreciate you having me, by the way, man. This is insane. Oh, my God.
You've played in a bigger crowd than this.
Yeah, but not for a podcast. But, yeah, so I started the podcast. It was really my buddy's idea. He's like, you have a lot to say, yada, yada, yada. You should start a podcast. And I was like, no. And then
and here you are.
Because I had never even put on a podcast before. And I started to just kind of research it, and I was like, "Oh, this is something I enjoy doing anyway. It's talking. I think it's the way we move forward as human beings is dialogue and conversation." And it was just one of those things where I wanted to kind of explore myself via other people, and it has been a tremendous gift.
What are you hoping people will really get from the podcast platform that they can't get from you otherwise?
Just an insight. It's not really about me more so than it is, current events or ideas or science. I like to touch on topics that I'm ignorant to, and so I like to dig into people, whatever their expertise is, and learn something from them. So it's more for me than it is for other people. But I feel like if you can humble yourself and listen to a conversation and come with an open mind to possibly learn something. It is for you, and it's for me because I've learned so much already. I've had an epiphany mid-podcast before. It's amazing.
You have, both as an athlete and an ex-athlete, you've been very outspoken, but that has not necessarily been, that's been more the exception than the rule until recently. And not just since Donald Trump was elected, but in the last 4 or 5 years here, more athletes have become more outspoken on social issues, political issues. What do you think has led to that change?
I think Facebook actually. No, I did a comedy show, and part of my bit was that it's like everybody wants to blame Obama or Trump. I blame Facebook, but it's because the political divide in this country it's no longer hidden. It's kind of you have to kind of wear your views on your sleeve. Whereas before it was kind of you went to work and maybe the person next to you believed what you didn't, but you guys had a common goal and you moved on with your life. But now if you happen to follow that person on any social media outlet, you happen to know that he doesn't think Black Lives Matter, and so it kind of creates this divide where you have to address certain issues. But I think now I don't want to say you have to pick a side, but you have to know what the overall political dialogue in the country is, whereas before it wasn't as prevalent.
You come in a long tradition of sports figures that are also activists, right? Tommy Smith, John Carlos, Muhammad Ali, Colin Kaepernick. Those folks have not actually been welcomed for their opinions, right? They've received a lot of punishment for it. How are you thinking about Major League Sports and how much further they need to go in actually embracing this diversity of opinions?
Well, I think different leagues have different standards. So, like in the NFL, in my opinion, they're so reactionary rather than proactive. Just like a perfect example is when Ray Rice, one of my good buddies, he was in trouble with that whole, he hit his wife in the elevator, and I don't condone domestic violence at all. But that was a perfect opportunity to open up a dialogue because it's not an NFL problem, it's a public problem. Domestic violence is a huge issue in this country. So rather than opening up that dialogue and having real conversations about it, they kind of hit it and just shunned him. And they continue to do those kind of things. You just want to shut them up, just be quiet. But it's perfect opportunity to be honest and have some humility about the situation and quit trying to pretend like everybody is Captain America and we all have problems. So let's address these problems and just move forward.
It feels like like you were saying, the NFL is reactive. The NBA seems to have had more success in having an open dialogue with their players about these issues. There have not been the standoffs between the players and the owners of the players in the league. Why do you think the NFL and the NBA are different in this, and what could the NFL do better to handle some of these situations?
I think the main issue why the NFL and the NBA are different is how the players are viewed in the eyes of that organization. So in the NBA, they're viewed more as a partner, like it's a partnership. And granted, that might have to do with the visibility of the players, but they grant them a little more respect than they do NFL players. In the NFL, it's you feel more like a worker than you do a partner, and that's big for any entrepreneur. If anybody has a business, I always tell entrepreneurs that are starting out, you always want people to feel like they're working with you, not for you, and that wedge in the NFL is what causes that rift. There is no open dialogue. I was talking to I had Mav Carter, who is LeBron James's business manager. He was on my podcast, and I was talking to him about this very thing. He has an open door. Granted, he's LeBron James, but most NBA players have open door to the commissioner. Mm-hmm. Well, we do as well, but there's really no substance that you can have a conversation where you can move the needle on something. I think that's where it has to happen, where if you really want to address these issues and not be a reactionary, you're going to have these conversations with these players.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit, because you've really been a model for a lot of people, I think, in living your life out loud and not having any shame to your game. So I got to ask you a real question.
All right, shoot.
You are an atheist.
I am.
In Texas.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, hello.
Like you might have some friends. How does that work?
I stay indoors a lot. No, it's definitely an odd dynamic. It probably wasn't the best state to do it in, but it's just one of those things where it was a long journey getting to this point. So it was never for any kind of public recognition. So it was more the public, I guess, coming out, I guess it would be the term, was more for people who feel kind of trapped in their situation, that then they need somebody to look to and say, it's okay to feel how you feel, it's okay to think how you think. And I'm not one of those picketing atheists who assert that there is no God. I'm more so on my quest and my journey, and I question everything, and I try to bring as much logic and reason to my line of thinking as possible, which I think this entire country can use more of. So.
It's a great thing.
Going back to football for a second. That's a hard question to follow up.
It's a great transition, by the
Thank
way.
you. Given the NFL's challenges with concussions and CTE, what will the NFL be like in 15, 20 years? Do you think it'll still be around? Will it be a fundamentally different game? How do you see the sport changing?
This is another, not to keep plugging my podcast, but this is another conversation that came up.
That's why.
Now what podcast? You can find out. No.
We have no problem with podcast plugging on this
For sure. But I talk about it often, especially with athletes that are currently playing and former athletes. It's something that I am a little worrisome about, more so than other cats that play. So I'm more inclined to say that maybe 60, 70 years down the road, the interest in the NFL is gonna dwindle, and I say that because as the science becomes more and more clear, it's not good for your brain, and that is the only vehicle we have for reality that we know of.
I just want to say you are an incredibly brave person. You are an atheist living in Texas who knows that football is bad for your brain. This courage exemplified.
I appreciate it. I didn't always think like this. That's one of I'm proud of that though. Like it was a journey to get to this point. Like when I was 20 years old, I thought I knew everything, and now I'm 30 and I know I don't know anything. And so that humility is keeping me going. But as far as the NFL and the CTE stuff, I'm unsure of the future. And I think as the science gets more and more clear, because they're still kind of ducking those studies, but as the science gets more and more clear, they're going to have to put more regulations on the rules of the game. And those regulations are why we fell in love with football in the first place. It's violent. We love violence here in America, and it's the most violent sport. And as it gets less and less violent, you're going to have less and less people watching.
Go ahead.
Well, you talk a lot about science, and I know that Neil deGrasse Tyson is your homeboy.
That's my guy.
So besides him, who is your favorite person that you've had on the pod?
Okay, so we only 19 episodes in, and we're growing though. We're growing.
Because all these people are going to start listening.
For sure. Subscribe, download, rate. That's important for some reason.
Algorithms.
So my very first episode was my mother, right? So I sat here and had my mother on my very first episode. So that was definitely one of my favorites. But aside from her, because I got to plug my mother.
It's literally our day.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
International Women's Day.
For sure.
We only get one.
Right. I think it was, he was and I'm going to butcher the title, but I think he's a special ops sniper. His name was Nicholas Irving. And it was, I write a Nicholas Irving fan.
Sister,
No, he's just a really sharp cat, and we dove way deeper than I anticipated. And we talked about his PTSD. We talked about how he felt about protesting the NFL. We talked about anything that you could think of. Like it just went way deeper than I thought I was gonna go. And that's, to me, that is the reason why I got into podcasting, was to talk to people like that, to bring me into a world that I'm completely ignorant about.
All right, before we let you go, so you told us who your favorite podcast guest you've had is. Who is the one person, who is the GOAT, who would be the person you would want to have on your podcast?
That is an interesting question. So at the end of every podcast, we actually do this. Yeah. We ask the guests to lobby for us to get Jim Carrey on the podcast. So I think after like a year, we're gonna put together like a clip, and hopefully it goes viral of like people just telling. The funniest one was I just had Snoop Dogg on my podcast.
Uncle Snoop.
And he had the funniest one ever. It's not funny if I do it, but the way he did it was hilarious. But yeah, we asked everybody to get Jim Carrey on. Jim Carrey is kind of posterized as crazy or a nut, but I think he's onto something, and I just want to dig into his brain. And so he's my guy, man. So one day.
All right, everyone, subscribe to Arian's podcast, and please thank him for joining us tonight.